number 0800 299 008.
Good morning to you once again. You are watching Morning at NTV as we do continue with Wednesday, May 11th, 2022. My name is Priscilla Regina Nelwoga, delighted to be in your company. Now, at about this time, we get into our Kickstarter. And our Kickstarter this morning, we're talking about relationships that we have built over time. And in particular, Uganda as well as the United Kingdom military relationships. Our guest today is Mr. James Hippie, Minister for Armed Forces in the United Kingdom. Good morning to you, James.
Good morning, Priscilla.
How are you?
I'm really well, thank you.
All right. So we want to understand what's your reason for your visit to Uganda at such a time as this?
Well, as you say in your introduction, the UK and Uganda have a long-standing relationship, and at the very heart of that has been cooperation between the British Armed Forces and the Ugandan Armed Forces. And there's a number of missions within East Africa in which the UK and Uganda are both involved. And so I've come this week principally to discuss Somalia and the progress that is being made there. So my visit also takes in Kenya and Burundi, as well as Uganda and obviously Somalia itself, but also just to explore what's going on in South Sudan, what's going on in the Eastern DRC, and I've had some great conversations with your ministers and your president yesterday about those issues.
And what are some of those developments from the conversations that you've had so far?
Well, I think that both the UK and Uganda share concerns over the progress that is being made in Somalia. We both recognise that there needs to be renewed political impetus to drive forward a lasting security transition in Somalia. Now, the elections next week are a great opportunity for that. But really, you know, the troop contributing countries to the mission in Somalia, they have the most important vote in all this, because it is through their continued commitment to security in Somalia that the progress will be made if the political will can be found. And so, you know, I needed to hear from your president and his ministers about sort of how they're feeling about it, how long the Ugandan commitment may be. And to Uganda's great credit, Uganda is, I think, utterly selfless in its willingness to commit in Somalia. People in Somalia speak very keenly about the bravery and the way that the Ugandan Armed Forces contribute to that mission. So very encouraging there, providing the political will can be found. And on the Eastern DRC, really I'm in listening mode, because, you know, I think that the UK is less involved in there, and yet it was clear to me in my discussions with your government yesterday that really it's the Eastern DRC that is your principal security concern, and so there was discussion about, well, how do we help you to address that? Okay,
all right. So while you're having those discussions going on with the government, how does the UK intend to support further our country in regards to defence and military cooperation?
Well, definitely through the continuation of the training of your armed forces in the way that we do at the moment as the absolute minimum. So at the moment, a number of times a year, we have short-term training teams who come down and work with
the UPDF,
exactly, and train them, but also actually your wildlife service. We do some work with them as well.
And in the wildlife service, what exactly do you extend to the country?
Well, the specific training that we do is with the junior commanders in the wildlife service around sort of junior level command. But clearly the purpose of that, and we do it with other countries around Africa, is in countering illegal wildlife trades, for which the Ugandans again are to the fore. So that's the sort of baseline level of commitment, Priscilla. You know, that work with the wildlife with the wildlife authorities and the work with the UPDF. Now, where I want to see it go is certainly around your continued commitment to Somalia. I think that there's a responsibility for the UK and other partners to work more closely with Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Burundi, Djibouti, to train forces for that mission, to enable them whilst they're on that mission, and most importantly of all, to hold the Somali government to account for the development of the Somali National Army, because the exit strategy for Uganda is inescapably the credibility of the SNA, and so I think that's the key thing there. And then on the Eastern DRC, as I say, I mean, the came very much with a blank sheet of paper, wanting to have the discussions. Some really great discussions have been had, and to my mind's eye, there is something that can be done, because your president is very effusive about a regional solution to the Eastern DRC. I think he is onto something. I think it's a great idea. And I think the UK probably has a role in looking at how we help Uganda and your partners in the region to operationalise that as a solution. Now, early days, the discussions are brand new yesterday. It's a scoop for you that we're even talking about it. But I think that could be the mainstay of UK-Uganda defence cooperation over the next few years.
Okay, all right. We're talking to you, Mr. James Hippie, who is the Minister for Armed Forces in the United Kingdom. He's here on a visit to continue working out the relations, especially in defence and military. Now, why is Uganda very instrumental? Because from all your submissions, Uganda seems to be at the centre of these conversations, even if you have referred to Kenya, Burundi, Djibouti, and the likes. What is the importance of Uganda in your security partnership with the UK?
Well, I mean, I think there's an inescapable centrality of Uganda's geography. If you look at sort of the three key principal security challenges in East Africa, they are South Sudan, Somalia, and the Eastern DRC. And the country that is kind of in the middle of all three of those is Uganda. So just geographically, there's a centrality. But actually, you know, there's a leadership that your government, to its great credit, has serially shown around the region, a willingness to operate not just in response to security concerns that are immediately on your own borders, but as is the case in Somalia, a security concern that is a country or so removed. And so inevitably, when the UK, as a member of the Security Council, and we sort of lead on the UN policy making for Somalia particularly, you know, it's obvious that Uganda should be one of the key conversations that we have, and that when we come, you know, the spirit in which to come is, hi, what's the plan? How can we help? And I think that for too long, you know, from my own military service in Iraq and Afghanistan, I have seen what happens when Western countries think they have the solution and they arrive in a region that they don't really understand and they try to impose their solution. Actually listening to the experts like your president and the presidents of other countries in the region and getting their take on what the solution should be. That's the best way of doing business, and that's why I've come and I've learnt a lot, and I think we've got some plans to take forward. Okay,
all right. So James, you have clearly stated to us the importance of Uganda because it's really central to all the security regions that you've talked about, South Sudan, DRC, Congo. But then again, what makes UK the best ally for Uganda in terms of military cooperation?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question, and there's a balance to strike between not downplaying our role, but at the same time having the humility to recognise that there are other partners that you have and that all in their way bring value. But I think that our proposition is based on a few things. Firstly, it is based on deep sort of historic cultural ties and a sort of familiarity with one another and a willingness to do business with one another. The UPDF has a long tradition of sending its junior officers to our military academy in the UK. There are many, many Ugandan soldiers who have been trained now by the UK Armed Forces. So there's a historic tie between our countries and an institutional tie between our armed forces, and that is hugely important. Secondly, when the UK does business with a country, we pride ourselves on making nothing more than a values proposition. We don't come and expect you to take on debt and that then we hold that debt over you like the sword of Damocles for years and years to come. Our relationship with people is, look, we are a freedom-loving democracy who believes in doing the right thing in the world. If you believe the same, we'd love to partner with you and help. And Uganda clearly feels like that around its role in security in the region. So we're here with no strings attached. We want to help because we share some values, we share interests in the area, so let's have a partnership. And I think that is different to some other international actors who come to the region with maybe a bit more of an agenda and a bit more of a culture of getting people into hock with debt or whatever else that can be quite challenging thereafter. And then the third and final thing is that I think people know that the UK is resolute. So when you start to work with the UK, we're in it for the long haul. We will work with you until the problem is resolved. And that, I think, makes us a good partner. I think it earns us respect around the world. And you know, people invariably, I think, enjoy working with us because they trust us not to run them over. They trust us to be in it all the way to the end. And invariably, there's an institutional relationship that pre-exists that means we start on a good note too.
Okay, all right. Regarding UK, what's happening in Europe, UK-Russia war, we want to find out. We've clearly seen that it's top priority for the UK government. We've seen Prime Minister Boris Johnson making an impromptu visit to Ukraine and, you know, having a conversation and encouragement with the president down there. So where the things stand right now, what is your government's view on Russia's current action as they stand, and why are you supporting Ukraine?
Well, we think Russia's actions are completely illegal and completely abhorrent. You know, the inescapable fact is that in January and the first 3 weeks of February this year, Ukraine was living peacefully within its own borders, a sovereign nation doing its own thing. And President Putin took the decision, with no provocation, to put 135,000 troops on Ukraine's borders and then to order them to invade. And since then, what we have seen is, despite the incredible failures of the Russian plan, we've seen a level of barbarism that we haven't seen on the European continent since the wars in the former Yugoslavia in the 90s, but actually on this scale, something we haven't seen since the 1940s. We are seeing populations brutalized whilst they are under Russian occupation, with rape being used as a weapon of war. And the UK cannot stand by and watch that happen. Neither can the US, neither can France, neither can Germany, neither can the EU. So the international community, when Putin thought that he would be able to do this and there would be no international consensus, that the Europeans and the Americans would not have the resolve to really come together and do anything about it, he has miscalculated appallingly, and the behaviour of him and his armed forces since the beginning of the invasion has only sought to bring us closer together, strengthen our resolve, to the point now where there is billions of pounds of military aid flowing to the Ukrainian armed forces every day, where the international community has come up with a sanctions regime that will really bite in Russia. And we are determined that Putin will fail in his mission in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians will get to end this on their terms with the restoration of their territorial integrity. Okay,
the statement is very strong. We are determined. Okay, all right. Let's talk about also Ukraine carrying out Russian strikes with British weapons. You have rightly stated, completely legitimate for Kyiv to identify targets in Russia to disrupt attacks.
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree, Priscilla, but is it not ridiculous that the Russians have felt so affronted at the idea that they are perfectly entitled to launch attacks from Russian territory into Ukraine, but somehow it is outrageous that Ukraine should fire back onto targets in Russia? I mean, that just makes, even to a non-military mind, that makes no sense whatsoever. So I think we kind of make no apology for saying that that's perfectly realistic. Now, the UK is providing Ukraine with weapon systems that have increasing range. We haven't yet delivered any artillery systems or weapons that could fire over the border, but the United States and others have. And so actually, whether it is with UK kit or not, I think there is just a point of principle that we are arming the Ukrainians in order to restore their territorial integrity. We are arming the Ukrainians to recover their freedom and to rediscover and to re-own their democracy. What the Ukrainians do with those weapons, providing they are legal acts of war under international law, is Ukrainian business. And it's very clear that the Ukrainians need to take the fight to Russia, not just in Ukraine, but over the border, to interdict some of their supply lines.
Okay, all right. James, also there was a warning by the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and he said there's a real danger of this turning into a third world war of sorts. And you said that it was an it wasn't so much an imminent threat escalating this kind of war. Do we see this ending this year, or do we see this war getting prolonged over a long period of time that gets to affect economies, not just for UK but also for Uganda?
Well, Mr. Lavrov takes more interest in my media appearances than my mother does. He sort of sits in the Kremlin watching carefully every day, and no doubt, Priscilla, he's watching us right now, feeling very cross that here I am saying these things again. His style over the decades that he's been doing the job is to escalate with rhetoric all of the time. That's what he does. I don't think that the Russians want to extend this beyond the borders of Ukraine. I think they know that to do so would be to provoke NATO, and NATO is a defensive alliance. The Russian characterization of Russia as NATO as an offensive alliance is simply untrue. But there is a resolve around Article 5 that an attack on one of us is an attack on us all. And therefore, I don't think that Russia will escalate it in a conventional sense. And I think the nuclear stuff is a very dangerous rhetoric, but it is just rhetoric, because a tactical nuclear exchange becomes a strategic exchange very quickly, and absolutely nobody in the world, including the Russians, wants to see that be the outcome. I don't think, however, to get to your question specifically, this is going to be over very quickly. Okay. I think that this is something that potentially may be going on for 5 years or more.
All right. What are the most recent sanction considerations for this continued war between the two countries?
Well, all the time, the UK is seeking, with our international partners, to strengthen the sanctions regime. And hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Russian assets have now been frozen internationally, including a huge part of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, which, that was their insurance policy. Again, another horrendous miscalculation by Putin was not just that he thought the West would lack the resolve to come together and put in place these sanctions, but he also thought that because he had kept back some of the revenues from Russian oil and gas in a sovereign wealth fund, he would be able to use that to insulate the Russian economy from sanctions. The mistake he made is he put all of that sovereign wealth fund in banks that were based overseas, and so those assets have been frozen, and the sanctions are really starting to bite. Every day we find new individuals connected to the Russian regime that we will extend sanctions to. Any companies that appear to be part of the Russian military supply chains, we are extending sanctions to. And then, most importantly of all, every single day there are conversations in Europe around energy security to get European countries off Russian oil and gas and onto either alternative energy sources altogether or different supplies of oil and gas from elsewhere in the world. That is the biggest sanction on Russia of all, because the thing that has allowed Putin to rebuild his war machine over the last decade is oil and gas revenues. And if he loses the custom of Western European countries, which he will, then he will no longer have that revenue, and that again is another massive strategic miscalculation by President Putin.
Okay, all right. Well, you've talked about the energy security, James, and that's a massive impact on the rest of the world. Currently in Uganda, we're grappling with high fuel prices. I should presume that's the case in the UK. Is that the case in the UK?
It is.
And how are you managing that particular crisis?
Well, by diversifying supply as quickly as we can. Because you're right. I mean, there is the global price of oil and gas, and therefore gasoline for our cars, gas to heat our homes. Well, I think that's probably less of an issue in the wonderful climate that you have here, but in the UK, the heating matters a lot. So we're looking really hard at, how do we get off oil and gas altogether? How do we make this a moment where we know for climate change we need to achieve net zero and find zero carbon ways of heating and doing transportation? So let's catalyse that technology, and let's have a chat with our partners beyond Europe about how we get oil and gas from places like that. Now, the UK, in fairness, is much less exposed. Only about 3% of our gas comes from Russia. But nonetheless, I think that we have to realise that we cannot allow one actor, such as Russia, to be able to hold the world to ransom because of our dependence on oil and gas and the impact that has on global spot prices. So, Yes, we're exposed. We share the pain. Prices for heating gas, particularly in the UK, are very, very high right now. I know prices for fuel in Uganda have climbed enormously, and that's causing a real concern for people here. The international community needs to come together, and rather than make the answer just to forgive and forget with Russia, I think we have to stand for our principles, but let's all work together to find different ways of assuring our energy security so that people at home get to keep a bit more money in their pockets.
So speaking of working together with the energy security that we're talking about currently, how is the UK government aiding its citizens to actually be able to find a balance with this?
Well, this is a very live debate in British politics right now, and yesterday our next session of Parliament was opened by the Prince of Wales on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, and at the very core of that was a proposition around easing the cost of living. And I think the government proposes to do that in two ways. Firstly, through interventions directly to kind of help people to subsidise the cost of living. So for the most hard-pressed families in the UK, the government is providing them with relief against their energy bills. And we will continue to build on that as a theme throughout the next Parliament. But the second thing, and I think every bit as important, is that in a period of inflation, because prices are rising, it's the fuel prices that are really driving the inflation. The key is to have within that sustainable and meaningful long-term growth in our economy. So rather than panicking and looking for quick fixes right now, I think the really smart thing to do, and this is what the UK government committed to in the Queen's speech yesterday, is to say we are going to make the hallmark of our economic policy for the next couple of years a real focus on meaningful investment in our economy, in infrastructure that drives economic growth, allows wages to rise sustainably so that actually the costs of living are matched not by government subsidy and short-term intervention, but are matched by meaningful growth that allows British people to earn more money in their jobs. That's the plan. Only unveiled yesterday. Now over the course of the next year or so, the government needs to legislate and bring in the policies to deliver that. But I think that's the sustainable way to help the British people. Okay,
all right. Then back to Africa as a continent. Why should we as African countries be concerned about what's happening between Russia's actions in Ukraine?
Because I think on this continent, almost more than anywhere else, there is an appreciation of what freedom and sovereignty means. In the lifetime of so many people on this continent, your freedom has had to be won, your sovereignty achieved, your national identity forged. And once you've done that, you are prouder of it than most people will ever understand. And you have to understand that for Ukraine, that is the same. In their lifetime, they have won their freedom, established a nation, won their sovereignty, and it means every bit to them what it means to you. And I think if you believe in sovereignty, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in your right as a nation to exist within your borders, then the right thing to do is to support them. Secondly, and again, I'm afraid, at risk of putting your viewers off their breakfast, there is also a recent history on this continent of brutalizing non-combatants, brutalizing civilian populations within war, particularly with violence against women and girls. And I just think that if you are not outraged by what you saw on the streets of Bucha and Irpin, if it does not remind you of some of the darkest moments on this continent, then you're simply not understanding what's happening in Ukraine right now, because it is every bit as bad, every bit as indiscriminate, every bit as barbaric. And I think, therefore, if you believe in freedom and sovereignty, and you believe that it is just unacceptable to brutalize civilian populations, then there's only really one side to take, and that is to be on the side of the Ukrainians, who frankly did not start this. They didn't invade Russia, and it is certainly not their troops that are in Russian towns and cities raping women and girls.
Okay, all right. James Heapy, your final remarks.
Well, look, thank you for having me on your show. I had been warned, Priscilla, that you were the sort of premier inquisitor on Ugandan TV. So I'm relieved to have survived just about intact. Uganda and the UK has a great friendship, a friendship that is based on a long history. At times that history has been challenging, but actually the challenges within our history are actually what makes the understanding of each other even greater, the friendship even greater. The conversation I had at State House yesterday, the conversation I had with your ministers yesterday afternoon and evening, allow me to leave Kampala with huge confidence that there's a real opportunity here for the UK and Uganda to have a partnership as equals, working together in our mutual interest in the region, and I'm really excited about taking that forwards.
All right, how long are you still in Kampala?
About another 6 hours.
Another. Okay, all right. Have you eaten matoke?
No, but you've recommended it.
Yes, you need to eat matoke.
So lunch needs to be steamed banana with my choice of meat on top, matoke.
All right, please do have that before you go back to the UK.
I will.
And thank you so much for your partnership. We're looking forward to bearing lots of fruit out of the conversation that we have had. Cooperation, military defense, and also within security within the region. We're talking about DRC, you're talking about Kenya and Somalia, as they have mentioned. Well, James Hippie, we wish you nothing but the best and take our greetings back to the UK. For now, we do continue with Morning at NTV. We also get to look at our tech note, technology and surgery, how the two are actually becoming one in forging a way forward in regards to the health sector. Please do stay with us.
You're watching Morning at NTV.